like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, it seems like you don't even know, man. You don't, it's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. That's the wind, man. Or like a dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. These old times.
All right, Mr. D, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
I'm reasonably well. New intro there. Goes hard, as the kids say. And also quite a pleasure to talk to you face to face at last. Because this is my real face, and that's your real face.
Yeah, I sort of joked before I face fagged, as the kids say, that my profile picture and my general online persona was just exactly how I am. I'm not very good at leading a double life, and so the old painting was just sort of it wasn't much of a disguise. I'll put it that way.
No, and with that extreme degree of Hispanic handsomeness, you can't keep that a secret. You can't keep that under wraps. You've got to just splash that out in the world.
It's true. The J is for Javier. Or Jesus,
Jose,
right?
Jose Jesus. Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot to choose from.
Yeah, look. Eventually, you realize that supporting yourself by drywalling new apartments is not nearly as much fun as talking on the internet. And so, you know what? I've left my life as a day laborer and become something even more despicable, a podcaster, right?
Yeah, a day unlaborer, a day leisure, yeah, exactly. A day leisurer. Yes,
basically just a useless social dead end, right? Providing.
Well, we're all the richer for it. No, that's what all the elites are now. We're all the esoteric right wingers are just That's what we strive for, uselessness.
Well, I mean, look, like when you go back to Aristotle, even, right, talking about the definition of leisure, right? It is that idea of having time to educate yourself. And so, one might call me a neat, but I prefer the term an Aristotelian gentleman. The branding's slightly better on that.
It's good. Yeah, it sounds better. I've always quite fancied myself as Diogenes. I'm not lucky enough to live in a jar, but I am surrounded by begging dogs, and I have been going to waggle a chicken at an emperor or two. So yeah.
I was about to say, the dog, you're pretty much there.
Don't mention it. It'll appear. It's like Voldemort. If you speak its name, you'll summon it.
Yeah, I've been I lived most of my adult life without animals, but I've been plagued by a giant cat. It's absurd. It's 20 pounds, not fat, just huge. And I guess I didn't realize that normally the sort of trouble a cat causes is limited by its weight, right? Like a 7-pound animal can, make a mess, but when it's 3 times that, you're dealing with a creature at that point, right? Like a particularly willful one. And to be honest, I'm finding myself more and more sympathetic with the Haitians, right? Like just killing and eating them. It seems to be slightly more civilized.
No. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. Yeah. No. I don't support.
Was that the last news story? It sort of feels like it was. Like that was the last time the news existed, which Haitians eating cats.
Yeah, it is difficult to keep up, isn't it? I don't know. It's all, it's all kind of a soup. It's all just kind of a soup in my head. There were Haitians eating Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then there are aliens flying above, and then we're looking at binders with Epstein file. It's all this miasma of just worthless shit that I can't even separate it anymore. It's all just sort of gone into a big stew and never come out whole again. So yeah, and I do wonder. I think about this. Like I think that there is some larger phenomenon going on with why this happens, with the instantaneity of information, and the way that, social media has distorted people's sense of boundaries, and sort of sense of, again, public and private in so many weird ways. And I just think it's broken. Like, it's broken every kind of model. It's broken every sort of thing we knew about, quote, news and journalism and political, sort of propaganda. Like, it just, like, nothing really works anymore. But we're still pretending. We're still pretending that it sort of works, that the world is sort of normal, even though everyone can feel it. Everyone can sense that something really radical has the bottom has fallen out of all of these things. And so we just go on with these empty forms that no longer actually operate or have any meaning. So it's a very strange interregnum that I think we find ourselves in.
Well, one of the other things is, and people have been commenting on this for a while, but it really does feel as if the internet has died. I noticed this in two places. One, just using a search engine, right? Like, I'm sure you've had the experience of trying to find out something basic and factual, and it's almost impossible, right? You have to scroll through an AI summary of nonsense.
No, they don't work anymore. No, they absolutely don't work anymore. I mean, Google was the one. I mean, because that's the one everyone used for years and years. I remember when I first heard about it, which was when it was in its sort of infancy, when it was still like a VC project in the late 90s, like 99, something like that. And I remember using it quite early, and was it like, if you were old enough to remember some of these things like Alta Vista and Web Spider, Web Crawler, and Ask Jeeves, and some of these things, Netscape Navigator, so I mean, they were awful. They didn't work. And then when you used early Google, it was just like, wow, this actually works. This actually gives me information that I need. And that was fine for years. And then it just didn't work anymore. And they deliberately sort of broke it. But I think that, I mean, you mentioned the sort of AI summary, that whole AI thing is something that I prefer to sort of avoid talking about, because it makes me so angry. All the kind of false pretenses and stupidity that hover around that topic. But I do think, in a way, it is that, and it is also the increasing population of the internet. There are, as we know, vast nations of the world who, in the last 10 years, have really started to come online, and that accelerates. And of course, as the internet, as the netizens, as they used to call it, as the demographics of the netizens change, as we of course see in real life, as the demographics of our nations change, then of course the way that the nation operates or doesn't operate becomes really obvious. So, you're right. It's just like there's been such a flood of anti-information. It's like dark matter, that has just flooded into our world line, that it's cancelled out any actual sort of information, any actual sort of truth. So yeah, I mean, it coupled with all of this weird distortions created by instantaneity and social media and all that, but it's also just that we're just now in this deluge of silt that that it's just impossible to find your way around. So yeah, I mean, pick your institution, and it's certainly, you can figure out how it's been broken in the last 10 years or so.
Well, and I know a little bit about this, just from previous job, but there's a whole, I wouldn't even say cottage industry, because many of these companies are quite large, that work in the field of search engine optimization, right? Which is sort of gaming Google so that your business will appear close to the top. And what they do is that they effectively kind of chum the water with common questions tangentially related to XYZ product, right? So for instance, art supplies, right? If you were looking for some specific question answered, well, a blog post, quote unquote, written first by Westerners, then by primarily Filipinos and Indians, and then by AI, which features those words in it, will pop up and you will be on their website. So you're getting nonsense information in order to drive traffic. And okay, that's one part of it. But another one is that the simultaneous death of an older version of the internet. Like I noticed this on forums, right? Which for practical interest were very helpful. If you ever owned an old car or something, you're looking for a specific piece of information. Oftentimes there'll be a forum thread from 2004, which tells you exactly what you need to know, right? And as those have literally disappeared and gone offline, the information now is hosted on social media where it's very difficult to search for specifically instead of as a feed. And also you have this just general kind of like slopification where, any search is turned into a game to get you to buy something. I mean, and then that same feature of, moving from kind of smaller private communities, quote unquote, to social media has sort of forced everything into this, like the Fisher Price side of the internet, where it is incredibly, streamlined and smoothed over, just designed to retain as much of your attention as possible while giving you as little information as is viable. It's absolutely infuriating. And I mean, down to the point where, this is a joke that you'll hear, even mainstream people talk about. The way in which, in order to get a straight answer on anything, you effectively have to search your question and then add Reddit on the end of it, because that's at least sort of a forum. And it's absolutely infuriating because look, like I'm not going to say I was here in the early era of the internet, but I remember what the internet was like 15 years ago. And it was a place where you could find useful information. Whereas now it feels like I don't even know why I'm going through the ritual of using a search engine anymore, because it is a completely useless undertaking.
Indeed. Yeah, and of course I do remember. I mean, I remember when the internet was purely connected to universities. I mean, I remember, having a Pine email account and again, everything you had news groups and everybody was an at edu. I mean, that's what it was, and then of course there was the great sort of infiltration by AOL, and of course a lot of like the old heads, particularly the academic types, were, that was a great topic of lament. This little thing we had, the internet. I mean, this is before even people talked about the World Wide Web. They said, well, it's sort of over. Things are kind of over. But they didn't realize how over things would actually get. This phenomenon you mentioned about searching, I mean, certainly art supplies, but I'll give you an example that I just faced, which is that occasionally I have to, speaking of dogs, I have to trim the dog's nails, which is a traumatic experience. And every time I do it, even though of course I've done it so many times, I certainly know how to do it, but I always end up looking it up, just like, okay, let me make sure which direction I'm supposed to do the cut and what are the signs that I'm cutting too close to the quick and whatever. I always want to make sure I'm, going to get it right. So I always look it up. And the thing is, when you search something like that, dog nail trimming, right? Just like your example with, sort of art supplies or something like that, you'll get these results, which, and you click on them and they're sort of formatted like old style weblogs. They look like, it's like puppy love, dot whatever, and it'll be, there'll be stock pictures of like dogs and, women and rolling in the grass with dogs or something like that. And then there will be these, what looks again like an article, but you'll realize very quickly when you read it that this is it's not an article. It's like text that has obviously been cobbled together by some sort of algorithmic, some sort of entity of that nature, and it's clearly from different sources. Like someone in, however many generations ago, in the mists of time, in the hoary mists of the past, wrote something about dog nail trimming on some blog or a forum or some veterinary website. And it is just sort of gone through permutation after permutation with less and less human interaction until finally it's just like a kind of soggy wraith of what it once was, and you'll read it, and again, I always get this uncanny, the kind of old uncanny valley thing where it's just like, well, I'm suddenly realized that I have to really work to find anything that's actually kind of coherent and human. It's just like all, it's the if people have heard the dead internet theory, where at a certain point there isn't any actual sort of live direct information. It's all this kind of miasma of things that have been sopped up and formatted. And it's really depressing, and I hate to say it. It is quite embarrassing, but I will often I would trust Reddit posts in that regard, as you mentioned, over just some random thing on the internet, because at least there's a chance that the thing on Reddit is actually a person. And often it'll be like 8 years ago or 11 years ago, it'll be something, but you'll actually find some information that was written by a human. And it's there's something quite awful about that. And also because it seems like, because I remember when it worked. I mean, the internet, it's always been, again, a bit weird and a bit wild, a bit janky, but it sort of worked because you understood that there were people out there who wanted it to work, like the people using it, that was a sort of good faith effort. And then sort of advertisements had always been a part of it, and the incursion of kind of advertising and the ways, the sort of desperate attempt to monetize everything. But there was just this sense that most of the people using it and working with it wanted it to function, whatever that function may be. And now it seems like everything is deliberately broken. Like the brokenness is part of the reality of things. And that, I think you can actually sort of expand that, and include government. You can include, charity. You can include, human interaction. Like everything, it seems as if some group has decided that brokenness is more profitable in one way or the other, and that's a bit distressing.
Well, this actually leads into Dave wrote a very, very good essay. Let me see if I can find the exact title of it. How Progressivism Died, right? And
this is Dave. Like Dave Green, the distributor.
Yes.
Okay.
And in it, he sort of begins with an examination of sort of a socialist out of time, right? This type is sort of more prominent in the UK than it is in the US, but like an old-fashioned labor socialist, right? Writing this article to hypothetical right-wingers, right? Saying like, right-wingers are just afraid of socialist ideas. They don't want to talk to us. And, his reaction to that is one, to address those claims, and also to talk about the death of sort of the recognizable left. Obviously, that is a cultural force, still exists, but it's shed many of its assumptions. And I think one of the most interesting ones is that the left has shed its optimistic, progressive vision of the future. And you see that in technology, right? That, the sort of egalitarian dream of the internet, right? Everyone being connected all at once will be able to, there's a famous Australian professor who talks about this, right? In the early ages of the internet, right? I have a dream that, one day every computer will be able to talk to one another, and that will usher in this sort of like Star Trek, gay race communism version of the future. And that's completely gone, right? In a weird way, like opposition to AI is very sort of like progressive coded, as much as I hate to use that word, right? Like, you see this in artistic circles in particular, right? AI is sort of a dirty thing, and I get that, but it seems as if the left has lost its progressive vision of the future, right? Has lost its Whiggishness, which is sort of an interesting thing, right? That is a core part of that tendency falling away. And the sort of animating spirit that Marx was able to give the left, and I realize not all leftists are Marxian in that way, but that idea of a sort of positive utopian future that is just, one revolution away, is just one change away. it seems that's gone. And so your point that it's never been as over as it is now, I mean, or we didn't know how over it could be, I mean, and that's quite apt. But I think it's interesting to see that hope die, if you see what I'm getting at, Mr. T.
Yes, I do think that, of course, in retrospect, part of sort of various revelations that have that have been sort of easier to see is the fact that, well, of course, the entire idea that the so-called like larger kind of political forces, like the Democrat Party in the United States, or like the Labour Party after the after the advent of Tony Blair. I mean, the idea that these were a continuation of actual sort of socialist or progressive, politically radical sort of programs. It was a lie. It's always been a lie. You know, I mean, they used, just as the GOP uses people with, with genuine sort of conservative um, orientation. They just use the sort of the true believers in a way, and then when they were no longer necessary, and of course everyone just dropped it. I mean, and as to what happened to the true believers, I mean, I think that those that remain, the younger versions of them, just became more radical and more kind of fractured and violent and sort of apart from any kind of utopian idea. It's sort of like so many things as we enter into a sort of more and more nihilistic age. y- you know all the kind of all the kind of good, I mean, whether they were good or not, but all the sort of ostensible good-natured aspect of, again, we have this positive vision. We want people to live in peace and harmony. What's the matter with, what's the matter with love, peace and harmony and all these things? Well, very nice, very nice, very nice, but maybe in the next world, as Morrissey told us so aptly in the 80s, because of course, it just, with greater nihilism, all this stuff just drains away, and so what's left is just the dismantling. There's always, even with the most optimistic people, there's always an idea that sort of oppressive structures needed to be dismantled in order to usher us into this, to this new positive utopia. But now it's just like, well, we just need to everything just needs to break. And of course, every people on the right can certainly relate to this as well. I mean, including myself. I mean, on my worst days, it's like, it was like from H.L. Mencken. Sometimes, a man just needs to hoist the Jolly Roger and start slitting throats. And so at a certain point, we also feel, I mean, we, people in our spheres, ostensibly, will feel this as well, where what's the point of having this positive reform-minded vision? Because as the sort of darker nature of everything reveals itself, it's just like it's got to be torn down. The earth has to be salted in front of it. So, I do think there's some very dangerous things that sort of happen when a civilization sort of loses hope in a positive vision. And I think you're right. I mean, certainly we've sort of learned that the global world order, which is ostensibly, quote, liberal. I mean, these are the people who constantly talk about democracy. In fact, they talk about democracy more now than I've ever heard in my entire life. And of course, now it's so obvious that no one believes in it at all. They don't believe in it. We don't believe in it. But of course, it just becomes this empty shell that everyone has to sort of pretend has a meaning. And it doesn't anymore. It's just we're just living in this world of facades. So
well,
it's a
democracy
worry.
is the Church of England, right? It's something that sort of exists as like a vestigial cultural form, but very few people pay it more than lip service. And in a weird way, this is sort of shown by a generational divide on both the right and left. On the right, you can look at the kind of age divide over a prominent Mediterranean democracy. We'll say that, or Jeffrey Epstein, right? A closely linked topic, where you have this sort of like older generation. We could derisively refer to them as boomers, but the sort of believers in the post-war consensus. You know, the people who were indoctrinated into that sort of civic and state religion, and then a split on the other side. And similarly on the left, weirdly enough, over the issue of Israel. I guess I said it there. There goes the monetization. But either way, you see the same thing, where you have. Are you familiar with like the No Kings protests, right?
Yes.
They
apparently they rebranded. They're calling it something else now.
Because they had one in your home country, didn't they? And then that got a little bit awkward.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have my, I'm now an official American, and I haven't been back for years, so I don't follow it as closely. But and then certainly I remember. Well, again, it's so. Oh, I remember. Yeah, well, I remember. What was it, about 3 or 4 weeks ago is when the No Kings thing happened. But of course, it didn't work. And so, but I did see recently they've come out with there's like a different. There's like they're like, No Kings wasn't cringy enough. We've got to make a cringier name, and so it's something like it has the word regime in it, which is odd. The new name, but anyway. Well, yeah. So yeah, I know. What's your point? Sorry.
No, but my point is, you see a similar generational divide between the No Kings protests and then the anti-ICE protests, where there is observably a difference both in intent, in sort of tenor, and also just demographics.
Yeah,
right.
Age.
Where No Kings is still operating within the kind of capital D democracy, right? Whereas the anti-ICE stuff is a little bit younger, and I hate to say the word dumber, but both because it's not grammatically correct, and also I don't know if it applies, but
more chud. Chuddy. Well, they're not really chuds, are they?
More juvenile, I guess. Whatever. The point is, right? You see that sort of break with the pre-existing sort of, I guess you would say, like mores of our democracy, TM. And as an outsider, it seems as if that sort of narrative breakdown is proceeding even more so in the so-called UK, right? YOO UK, where it just doesn't seem like anyone believes that the state, I don't know if to say the state is legitimate, but the state in and of itself doesn't seem to be providing any answers or narrative, right? It's just simply, we are in charge. And look, like that works for a little bit, but so much of the power of our regime has been narrative, right? The ability to influence people culturally and, through all these kind of like cultural outputs. But to see them give that up is very weird, right? It does sort of feel like the end of an era in a way, right? Like an era, really like the death of the internet and the death of narrative, I guess, if I'm not being too grandiose with this.
Yeah. No, I think that you're right about that. And certainly, I mean, just the notion, I mean, a street protest. I mean, again, it's just like, how many times are we going to have to hear about Woodstock? How many times are we going to have to hear it? And I love, I'm actually quite fond of a lot of the cultural products of the 1960s. I'm not ashamed to say, I like the Beatles.
Look, sometimes you need those Elon bucks,
Yeah, no, I understand you. The slot must flow. But I do think that just the notion, like what is a sort of a kind of street protest? Like, it's not like you're having a campus confrontation between like inter-Jewish Haganah, ultra Zionist students and like Free Palestine. It's not something like that where there's a visceral sort of almost a kind of martial fight thing going on. Just like, we're just having a protest for democracy. Well, I mean, what relevance does that even have today? Like, I just think, of course, the street protest was exhausted, I think, 20, 30 years ago, and now it's just really over. By the way, the rebranding for the No Kings, you got to brace yourself with this. It's called Rage Against the Regime.
Oh, oh. I mean, speaking about incredibly embarrassing motifs from a previous era, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like cribbing, like a 90s punk band, right? To me, and this is kind of a funny example, but I think you're quite right about the aesthetics of protest being very out of date, right? They are sort of LARPing as the 1960s every time. And in a weird way, you even see that with Rage Against the Machine, right? That in that famous image of the monk setting himself on fire, right? What is that? Well, that is a callback to Vietnam. Then, not even 20 years later after they've released that album, and this is my favorite thing, I think, is it Tom Morello is his name? He's a disgusting person.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
One of the funniest just kind of bit moments in American politics was Paul Ryan, right? You may remember him from doing curls on the cover of political magazines as the new face of the conservative movement.
Oh, I remember. I remember.
But he said, I don't know why I remember this, like in Time magazine, that his favorite band was Rage Against the Machine. And it's a perfect picture, right? Of rebellion being copied, turned into a product, and then fully absorbed into, the actual machine of governance. And I think that there's an interesting way, and again, right, the end of an era in which we have been playing in the boomers' sandbox for our entire lives, right? Those cultural motifs, copied over and over again. I mean, look, like if you bought a music magazine, it would have Bob Dylan on the cover in 2025. It feels sort of stuck in that way. And it feels like that cultural force is sort of dissipating as the generation which sort of created it does. I mean, I think what the 50% mortality breakpoint for boomers is in 5 or 6 years, right? Relatively soon. And it's interesting to see. I mean, look, I was just up in New England, in a very blue area, and walking around, it was very interesting to see because a lot of these people who live there are, very wealthy, retired liberal boomers. And then the kind of servant class, which is like, tattooed, slightly scruffy looking millennials and Gen Z, right? Also very left wing. And to see them both sort of using the same motifs, right? Separated by, 2 to 3 generations in 60 years, just with slight variations. It's like, this is a dead culture, right? There's nothing here anymore. We're just kind of copying it over and over. It's sort of similar to how you mentioned with these like listicles, where you have a piece of information and just like making a zine, right? Where you cut something out of, a magazine and photocopy it, or I guess mimeograph. I don't remember the technology of the era. You lose resolution. We're on the sort of 8th or 9th version of that, where we've copied all of these memes to the point where there's almost nothing left. It's just kind of gray pixels.
Yeah, I see. It's like making copies of a VHS tape. Again, speaking of dramatic loss of resolution every generation, but that is what happens. And of course, people forget. Okay, why do we associate street protests so much with the 1960s? Well, certainly in America, there was a real danger because the draft was instituted, and so people like young men were being sent to Vietnam. Whatever they thought about it. Like it wasn't. I mean, and of course, I remember the anti-Iraq war protests. In the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and fine. Yeah, yes, people could protest about that, and of course, I think most people, or at least a lot of people, come to the conclusion that that entire project was just wrong and immoral. But the kind of urgency of it, even then, it wasn't there because, of course, the draft was not instituted during the second Gulf War. But again, I mean, people, why do we associate so much with the '60s? Why was the Vietnam thing so resonant? Well, because people that with skin in the game. People were you were in real danger of being called and being sent away into that hell. So I think that everything seems so virtual now. I mean, yeah, yes, I mean, and of course things do drastically affect our lives. And most recently, of course, the absolute civilizational debacle of COVID. You know, that is something that harmed all of us. But we don't think about those things. We're thinking about other things. We're thinking about, and of course, I mean, you say something like, well, concern about events in the Middle East, in Levantine country between two sort of squabbling peoples. Well, yes, of course it does affect us because if you're an American, you're certainly paying for it, and in one way or the other, even your ostensible right to speak freely, your opinion about that is being challenged. Just recently, a thing reported that was floated by the Trump administration of withholding federal disaster relief funds from any city that institutes a boycott of Israeli goods. So, yes, there are real consequences to those things, but a lot of things that are pushed with great urgency, it's very difficult to kind of feel personally involved in them. In the way that, well, when your number comes up, you're off to Vietnam. It's sort of like, well, everything seems sort of virtualized and removed, one generation or two generations or three generations from any sort of reality, any sort of pain, any sort of urgency in your own life. So that may be also responsible partly for this kind of flagging sense of any of this meaning anything at all. People don't have this fire in them because, again, everything seems slightly removed from us, even when it is, I mean, for me, I still, I, the I will never get over what I saw happen between 2020 and 2022. I mean, and even afterwards, with regard to COVID, because I think that was such an egregious violation of so many civilizational norms. And the thing is, what is the great black pill about that is everyone is just moving on. No one's going to be punished, really. No, there's never going to be an answer for it. There's never going to be a reckoning as to how people behaved in all walks of life. And I do think that, again, we talk about this great sense of nihilism that's just sort of eating away at us. I think that's part of it. It's just like, people, how do you feel anything about anything when you just see one injustice after the other where there are no consequences at all? I mean, even 20 or 30 years ago, I think the powers that be understood that there had to at least be the appearance of consequences. Like, when somebody did, quote, bad things, then there had to be a kind of a play of justice being served of one way or the other. It had to be made to look as if things were operating, and now there just isn't even a pretense of it. Oh no.
Well, and that was sort of the importance of, like, the Gerardian ritual of Watergate, right? We got them, whoever them was. If they were being got for something legitimate, those are both separate questions, right? But there was this idea that, well, we're going to hold someone's feet to the fire. And in a way, it sort of feels like the Epstein story is the thing that is killing MAGA. And I think myself and others had sort of wondered what MAGA after Trump would look like, right? Is J.D. Vance going to be the successor? But what it seems like, at least as of current writing, is that Trump and MAGA are killing themselves, right? And they're killing themselves over this, like, Mediterranean sex pest, right? This sort of, like, the whole MAGA project is self-immolating, right? Unable to drain the swamp in the kind of most egregious case. And in a way, that's sort of a death of hope, because the narrative of Trump, right, was like, we finally have our guy. He's going to go in there and do it. He's going to lock her up. And at least for round one, there was a compelling sort of in-universe narrative that the deep state fought him back. They hit him with Russiagate, which was a giant scam. They kept him from doing what he needed to be done. And then at the moment of decision, right, when he was going to make a change and come back with a vengeance, they screwed him, right? And that was a compelling enough narrative. And then he got back in and nothing happened. It's sort of this dark mirror of the messianic sort of impulse that surrounded Barack Obama, right? Much as, Biden was this hated figure on the right, and Trump was going to come back in and, set us towards a new golden age. You sort of saw the inverse, I guess, with Obama, right? We're done with the Bushes. This is the new rainbow multicultural America. We resurrected MLK from the grave. He's very articulate, quote unquote, and we're going to do it. And then nothing happened, right? It was like you did, as a millennial would say, you did the thing. And, it's like you sacrificed a virgin and then the drought didn't end, right? It's like, it's a crisis of faith, really.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, even, I never had, I approached Trump 2.0. I mean, I supported him. I don't think there was any. I don't think there's anyone sensible who says, "Well, I kind of wish Kamala Harris had won." I mean, whatever the failings of Trump's second incarnation, it's certainly better than in ways that I think are the most important things. I think the most important issue, as I think the majority of Trump voters thought, is that stopping the absolute invasion of the United States was just by far priority number one. In fact, I think one of the faults is that Trump has done that to a degree, but isn't focusing on it as much as he should. I just think that is the most important issue, and I think a lot of people feel that way. And of course, that would not have happened had he not won. So I mean, immediately, I think a lot of people are being, in a way, things aren't quite as bad as that. Things aren't. The situation does not merit saying, I wish Trump had not won the second time. Clearly it's good that he won. But now, of course, does that translate into, well, we expected miracles? I didn't expect a miracle. I just wanted that one thing. And of course, that was enough to support Trump. And I understood, of course, that what has been happening would probably be the case the second time around. I think that is a general. To me, there's always been a slight feeling of incompetence around a lot of the kind of Trump administration people. They don't have that. They don't have that royal demeanor, that the Democrats were able to kind of put on for a while, like with Obama. Here are these hyper competent people. You shouldn't, there's no questioning that they're the best people for the job. Obviously that wasn't true at all, but they were better at pretending that. But I think just a lot of the stupidest errors, particularly those made by Bongino and Kash Patel and by Pam Bondi, I mean, they just look like small time. It's just like small. It's like watching a local production of Othello. Your community theater production of Othello. It's just like, okay, you can say the words sort of, but there's just a slight air of amateur hour to this, and I think a lot of those things are what dishearten people. But I think it's important to say, well, at least the worst case scenario didn't happen. And one hopes maybe, I think that Trump, one of his better qualities is he does seem very capable. He seems capable of changing his mind, even doing a complete 180-degree rotation. Like, he's not beyond that. And so I think he can change if the will, if it seems, what does Oren McIntyre say? Always ABC, always be chimping. Because it does work. I mean, they do respond to a kind of groundswell of dissatisfaction. So maybe that's a good thing. But yeah. But I also see why people are extraordinarily disappointed, as am I. The thing that's particularly innovating about the Epstein thing is that Trump could have just not made a big deal about it. Like, if you're not 100% ready to again release the files, do all that stuff, have any kind of transparency, then why bring it up at all? Like, he made it. It was something he talked about prior to his election this time. And so I think that was a big stupid thing. Don't Pam Bondi. I've got the files on my desk. We're gonna have this big cringy event where we give everyone a fucking 99-cent white binder from Staples, and they're gonna make this big show of it. If you're not gonna do the deed, why? You're hurting yourself by even mentioning it. So that's the thing I can't figure out. I'm of the opinion that, I think a lot of people have the wrong expectations. Like, not the discerning, wonderful people who listen to your show, Mr. Burton, but I mean, I think the lumpen prole, particularly of the right, the kind of MAGA, your average MAGA chud. I think a lot of people still have this idea that there's like a safe somewhere, and there's like a leather-bound book, written in blood,
right? Bound in human
Jeffrey
skin.
Epstein, this is what I did, and here are all the signatories of all the people, that, and that just doesn't. It's not the way the world works. It doesn't exist. There is no, at least in that way, there is no sort of document that's going to blow the whole thing open. I mean, if they were to be transparent and this information it would be death by 1,000 cuts, more than some great, startling volcanic revelation. So I think that people come to this with misplaced expectations. But I think the fault ultimately lies with the Trump administration. They lit this fire, and then they piddle on it to try to put it out, and it just looked awful. It looked terrible, and it still does.
No, definitely. And I think that, look, I don't regret my vote. It's the first time I've ever voted for president. And given the relatively small amount of power I had and the choices presented me, it was a rational choice. But to me, I think that the widespread discontent sort of coming from this is interesting, right? I have sort of a view into MAGA world, right, due to some work that I do, and it's interesting to see how angry the MAGA grandmas are about this. And you've seen a collapse of support under particularly young people, among other kind of vital demographics. And look, polling is polling. I'm not trying to make that sort of a core part of my argument, but the collapse of the unshakable support, right? We will follow this man everywhere. This man can do no wrong. And taking that to, well, I followed him this far, but no further, right? You have even Alex Jones sort of stamping his feet, turning red in the face and saying to the president, I'm not a member of your cult. And I mean, to be honest, you could be forgiven for the last 10 years for assuming, yes, Alex Jones was a member of his cult, right? He acted like he was, sort of possessed by the egregore of Donald Trump. But it's another way in which like a major narrative is collapsing, right? A sort of alternative sort of like self-story Americans could tell themselves has sort of been taken away. And we talk a lot about civilizational winter, right? As you know, people who have all pretended to read Spengler, but there is an interesting degree to which, again, like, I guess I never thought it would be this over, in the sense that there really does seem to be very, very few and limited sort of comprehensive social narratives anymore. It's like the death of the internet, right? The death of that has also sort of killed like comprehensive political worldviews. And maybe you could say, look, this is the death of ideology, right? Ideology is sort of a feature of modernity, and it had an expiration date on it. And we're sort of going back to maybe a more honest or or more Hobbesian, depending on which way you look at it, view of politics. But it does sort of seem to be the end of an era, right? And we were talking before we went live about the kind of the way in which you were on a show that ended, right? And I myself have sort of moved away almost entirely from topical news, right? Okay, maybe you talk about a story as a prism through which to examine a broader theme, but there does just seem to be this, I guess, kind of like dearth of social coherence in everything. I don't know, which is, it feels, if not new, it feels more complete than mayhaps it did before.
Yeah, and I think that it's also that, again, because of these great and terrifying changes to the kind of structure of human life wrought by electronic communications of one sort or the other, the internet, telephony, miniaturization, algorithms, which we call intelligence, having a sort of greater facility to manipulate information. I think, in a way, just too many pillars of civilization are being chipped at the same time. Because it's not just like, not just as it's wrought this kind of, I think also just decades of dishonesty, and of course the as you say, the passing of one generation after the other. It's just like within a period of 10 or 15 years, just the entire facade of political legitimacy for so many nations, particularly Western nations, America, Britain, have just completely fallen apart. It's just like, as I said, no one even bothers to pretend anymore that things are legitimate, that things are working, that justice is being done, that truth, justice, and the American way is even a thing anymore. So fine, okay, that falls apart. Then what do you do? Well, you redirect your sort of needs, your civilizational needs, to something else, where you redirect it to religion. Well, there's a positive thing there. Many people are sort of finding, they're sort of returning to traditional Catholicism or to Orthodoxy, or sort of putting a greater emphasis on faith and religious practice in their lives. But at the same time, of course, as every institution is falling apart, that it certainly includes at least the sort of edifice of various Christian churches, who are, again, they find themselves, sort of like, we find so many of these once strong Christian denominations have been just eroded and debauched and defamed from within. So now you get, Church of England just confirmed its first lesbian female bishop. The words lesbian female bishop should that combination should never be uttered. There's no reason for you to ever have to say that, and yet we find this sort of and of course, in the case of the UK, the Church of England is the state church, and it has been for hundreds of years. But even though, of course, people are finding ways to sort of lean on faith and religion in these times, but there's also a kind of weakness there. What if you were brought up an Episcopalian like Tucker Carlson? Where do you go? Because your church is again eaten away from the inside by degenerates and apostates. Uh, so that's a problem. Okay, so what else do people do? Okay, well, you can escape into art and culture. Well, can you? I mean, okay, let's go to the movies. Well, why the hell would you go to the movies? No one makes. Everyone forgot how to make films. Obviously, maybe there's a small minority of things, but it's not like you can go and get sort of escapism. You're not even allowed to escape anymore. So you're not going to see that. I mean, certainly, unless you're a very esoteric person like myself, you're not going to find any refuge in painting, the sort of the visual arts, the plastic arts. You're not going to go to your local art center and look at a sculpture exhibit, probably, because probably isn't one. It's now probably been sold to a Chinese marijuana growing criminal organization, your local art center. So, it's just like, again, all of the traditional avenues that people had to find comfort and strength in their life, they're all kind of falling apart at once. And I think that is a huge problem. And part of the reason why we're in interesting times. We're in uncharted waters here because this sort of thing happens, and it's happened many times in history. But I think that we're experiencing it certainly for the first time in several hundred years. I mean, since the Industrial Revolution, where the entire core meaning of society also fell apart in a certain way. But it's even sort of worse now because it's so totalizing. So I do think this explains that this is something greater than just like a story of political corruption or subversion. Like there's just a whole epochal change going on everywhere, and it's destabilizing. And of course, to be in the middle of that chaos is distressing to a lot of people, including myself. I'm enough of an autistico that I don't like change, and of course, everything is changing. But the question is, what do you do? Do you hide under a rock? Well, I'm old and infirm enough that may be my only choice. But for younger people, that's not an option. They're not. You want people to wall themselves up for the rest of their lives when they're 20 years old, 30 years old. So yeah, I think there's this desperate need to find action, to have something vigorous and positive to do that isn't just sort of like talking about the day's news online. I think you're right that that's just over. It just feels like there just isn't any news. I think people want to do something where their bodies and their sacred honor are at stake. People like something. People need meaning in their lives, even dangerous meaning, but they need it. And look what happened. I mean, look what happens if you think, oh, well, I can just goon out. I can soy face and goon out myself with my soy eggs and my Funko Pops. I don't even know if people still do the Funko Pops, but a materialistic existence is just living death, and I think people feel that as well. So
yeah, well, and I think that this is largely what's driving the return by young people and young men to particularly strict forms of religion. So obviously, the ortho bros and the trad cats are seeing a lot of this, but even being in a heavily Protestant area, I see it at my own congregation, right, where we sort of have this glut of sensitive young men around. And, traditionally, right, you have much more women and much more elderly. Sorry, I'm losing my ability to speak in comparatives, Mr. D, but in churches. And I think that desire for something that it provides meaning, but also expects something of you, right,
yes,
requires you to limit yourself and give something up. I think that is sort of an antidote rather to nihilism, right? And what we were, sorry, finish that thought.
Well, no, I was just going to say it's duty. I mean, it's this concept of duty where, again, you are operating in a situation where you are providing things, but things are also expected of you. There is a form, there is a sort of call that is not sort of this idea where, oh yeah, I'm going to voluntarily, I'm gonna charity, whatever. No, I mean this idea where this is what's expected of you. I think that you're right. I think people need, certainly men need that. You need that sense of duty in your life.
Well, and that's why, and I realize we're at time, and this is quite a big conversation to drop right at the end. But the sort of tired refrain from the conservatives and the IDW types is, oh, woke is a religion, and it's like, okay, well, maybe it sort of apes the religious impulse, right? There may be martyrs, there may be these kind of like religious sites, but fundamentally, it doesn't require anything of you. It doesn't limit you in any way. And not looking to, anger another group of people, but this is always my question to the pagans. What have you given up?
Yeah.
How does your God limit you? And to me, I think that is really what enables that sense of duty, sacrifice, whatever you want to call it, what, inoculates a population to modernity, right? What sort of makes you resistant to that. And without it, if you were simply a consumer, well, there are more tempting consumer choices to be made. And sure, maybe you have made that one, but how can you build a culture around simply one of any number of, I guess, kind of like options at the great salad bar that is, modern culture?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think there's a problem there, because I think that inherent in these things is also that it not be, again, a menu with 500 different options and you just choose which one you like the best, because that's sort of part of the malady. Like what we want is a culture, what we want is a civilization, and that is a shared experience. It's not just like, okay, well, I want, femboy,
And culture is non-consensual, right? It's
and it's
not.
non-consensual. You are part of it, and it's not, you don't I mean, again, so there's this sort of mythos of, the consumer myth of free choice. Well, if I buy this brand of mayonnaise and you buy that brand of mayonnaise, and and we're different, and this sort of mutates into, well, what I only associate with my zoophilic, lesbian femboy Japanese furry anime, this Discord server. These are the people, omni pan mutasexual, it's unicorn, whatever. I'm just piling on descriptors there, but you know what I mean. It's just like this sort of thing where everyone burrows into smaller and smaller little holes and say, well, these are my people. I like this. Or I like this. I'm an Odinist, with these characteristics, because of course I've just picked and chosen it. But that again, that's just buying another brand of mayonnaise. Like that's not a culture, and it's not a civilization. As I said, these things have to be shared, not by everyone, obviously, because that's never how things work. There's always, at the periphery, there's always a bit of slip for certain people, but it has to be big. I think that's why MAGA is so appealing, or was so appealing, because it felt like a lot of people were all in. Like, this is one thing. Unfortunately, you can't make that. When you make your coherent cultural moment about one very flawed man, it's got to be about something bigger than this. And there are, I mean, obviously, people having conversations. What is MAGA post-Trump? Like, it must be bigger than him, because, of course, he's not going to be able to do it. He's not going to be here forever. In fact, it's probably not that long. I mean, technically, he only has this term left. So again, what is the big thing? What do we all share, and what can we sort of use to build a kind of cohesive moment together? And I know I'm not knocking well, I'm knocking certain people. That's certainly true. I have no truck for the Guna furry community or whatever, those sort of things. But but I do think again, people have to acknowledge that these things must be part of a coherent mass thing to be civilizational, to be cultural, or they will just do everything. Everyone will disappear into an increasingly niche rabbit hole, and we won't accomplish anything. And we will, and do again, divide and conquer is a thing. I think because we've been so divided and subdivided over the past 50 years or more, we're weak. We're much weaker than we used to be. So, yeah.
There's several things there. That argument, or a slight derivation of it, is exactly why I consider myself to be a deeply closeted Catholic. But on kind of a more serious note, right? There is a way in which I think that the sort of the low IQ reading of elite theory was incorrect. And in this, I'm not sort of talking about the top of the pyramid, ironically enough, of elite theory proponents, right? But sort of as that idea trickled down, it basically became, the masses do not matter. And in sort of a narrow, immediate sense, that might well be true. But the problem is, and we're seeing this now, there needs to be a moral unity between ruler and ruled in order for there to be a culture, in order for it not simply to be, a hostile occupation. And that moral unity is broken down, right? It's the thing that we're talking about. And look, like, states can't exist without that. But it is a symptom of decay, right? It is a symptom that this, ruling cabal, whoever, they are in your imagination, is losing their grip on power, right? They have lost the narrative control. And there's sort of two ways to look at that, which is, one, I have to live here, and I'd much rather live in a stable society than an unstable one, right? Things can get nasty. But also, as someone who views myself as living in sort of like the empire of lies, right? This sort of like, horrible, godless empire, and realizes that, if I'm going to have a country, the empire must go. It's sort of hopeful, I guess. So, D, this has been, I guess, a massively depressing conversation. But is there anything you want to say as we sort of wrap this up?
Again, I just think that life is not a bed of roses. Certainly, if you're a religious person, if you're a Christian of any merit, you would you were told this. We were told many times. By Christ himself, and certainly by the various catechisms of your faith, that it's not how it works. Life in the world is a series of struggles and challenges, and the thing is, of course, is to keep your head up. Keep yourself looking at the sun, looking at redemption and transcendence, looking at the fact that that life does have meaning, however bad it is down here, and it's going to be tough, and as I said, we're living through a I'm not going to use the word paradigm shift, because it's just, I don't know, has a squishy feeling to that.
Do you prefer the term vibe shift, Mr. D?
No, even worse, because it's bigger than vibes. It's bigger than vibe. I like to think of it as an epochal change. And so obviously, you gotta hold on. You gotta be the man amongst the ruins, to quote Julius Evola. I do think there is something very important to that. So I mean, again, as I said, it's hard, but faith is and religion is real as a Christian, and you can still cling to that. Cling to your family. Cling to this idea of what you want the world to be. What does a sort of refreshed and re-strengthened America or Britain, what does it look like? You know, you may not get to see it, just like if you plant that tree, you may not get to see it when it goes to full flower, but you can't break that chain. So you mentioned again losing the legitimate, like elite theory. One of the problems with it, is, of course, is that it, in its current manifestation, it's sort of promulgated by people, by quite nihilistic people who most of whom are are agnostics or atheists, who don't have any sort of larger sense. There's no sort of morality underpinning it. I mean, there was just very briefly, there's this medieval context, this medieval concept of the chain, the great chain of being. I mean, academic agent used to talk about this all the time, and I think it's a wonderful one, because it's this idea that, again, the chain, if you think of the chain hanging vertically from heaven, at the top of it, which you cannot see, is God himself. That is the firm foundation of the chain. And as you come down on the chain, of course, you have different strata of people. You have kings, you have the Pope, you have priests, you have everyone. And whoever you are, however low you may be, whatever station in life that you've been given or you fall into, you're still a link in this chain. And of course, everyone, you can't be you're a king up top. If you break that link, the rest of the chain will fall, and it will fall into oblivion and darkness. So again, it is important to remember, it doesn't matter if you're, the elites, only the elites matter. No, everyone on that chain matters, because the chain relies on each link to keep itself intact and to keep the connection to God Almighty, And so I think that's a wonderful way to think about it, and a way to think about how we've gone wrong and why things feel so broken and wrong, because so many people broke the chain. And as Fleetwood Mac says, never break the chain. You will never break the chain. So good advice. That's my positive spin on this terribly depressing conversation. I thought we were going to talk about, acrylic painting or something like that, but no, it's good, and I certainly
that was sort of my intention, but then you got me talking, which I hold you in contempt for, because if I had just been able to ask you about your opinions on artists, this would have been a much more cheery episode, and
a much less interesting one. I mean, I'm sure a significant portion of your audience don't give a flying fig about it. So I think well,
that's why I wanted to do it. I have a certain contempt for my audience. They must be educated.
Oh, well, I love your audience, and I love you, Burden. Thank you for having me for a conversation.
Yeah, it's been good to catch up with you. It's been too long. I was sort of nervous about talking with you. I was an early
guest. Oh, nervous about talking to me.
Well, do you remember what happened last time we spoke? I got into a car accident.
Oh, yeah, people. Yeah, I mean, that was on one of my spaces. My spaces, very weird things happen. Yeah. So, I mean, well, after that, there was a shooting in New Orleans, which we heard through Sandbatch's microphone, like he was on the space, and just a couple of streets away, there was a big shooting that made the news, whatever. Or a car ran into people. I don't know I don't really remember. Yeah, and we were talking to Jay Burden once on the space, and he hit you hit a deer.
I did. Well, I mean, if we're being pedantic about it, the deer hit me.
The deer hit you, yes, as they often do. Yeah. And
well, I wish I had the. It did. I wish I had audio of it.
That'd be great.
I wish if I hadn't muted myself, which I don't know, this might be a crime, in which case this is made up. It didn't happen. I'm saying it to make people laugh on the internet. But yeah. If you had the full audio, I might have muted myself. You could have heard me euthanizing the deer, because I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't want to let the animal suffer. It had to be done. I'm not, it wasn't like a great glorious action, but it was just the most bizarre situation, right? Driving through the country at 80 miles an hour in the middle of the night, and then all of a sudden, oh, sorry, I have to go. I've hit an animal. But yeah, Mr. D, you've mentioned your spaces. If people want to find your spaces, how can they do so?
Well, it's a very esoteric thing, of course, because they only exist in the moment that they happen. I don't record them. I used to, but a lot of the people who appear, they're sort of regular people who come on the space, and a lot of them felt very uncomfortable because there's certain things that they couldn't say. They felt like if it was recorded, they couldn't use the hard R or whatever. So, so, but if you're
You mean you
awake,
can't say reprobate
you
on X Spaces?
no, you can't say rectum either. No, but so I don't record them. But if you happen to be awake, it's a wonderful thing. Uh, my friend Apostolic Majesty, who has a history channel, he discovered someone left a comment and said, "You are a valued asset to the sleep community on YouTube." So apparently, there's this whole community of people who go around and look for videos that will help them sleep. And there's nothing, as a content creator, nothing more thrilling than have someone tell you that you are an asset to the sleep community. But I think of myself as a proud asset of the sleep community. So if you have difficulty sleeping and you want to hear some often slightly drunken people talk about nothing for 3 hours, then you just visit my Twitter account, which is at John D, but that's John with an I, which is of course the trad way of spelling it before the J came into the Roman alphabet. So if you remember at the top of the cross where our Lord was crucified, it says INRI. Of course, that's J, Jesu Nazarenum. So it's just like that. IOHNDEE. That's John D, all one word, at X or Twitter, whatever you call it. And I have these spaces in there, frequently, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sometimes Saturday. So, and they usually start late, start 10:30, 11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time or Eastern Standard Time if it's the autumn. So, yeah, if you like that sort of thing, you could tune in. And there's lots of wonderful people, far more interesting people than I. Charles Maine, people may know, Semiagog, Christopher Sandbach. I mean, even people like Orrin McIntyre occasionally pop up, and very infrequently, Jay Burden himself.
It's true. I've made a handful of appearances, and I am very glad that they have been deleted. I'll put it that way.
Probably, yeah. But anyway, yeah. So that's what I do for the moment. I will be just one more plug. I will be in the near future, putting content on my YouTube channel. So I'm not going to plug the channel yet. The first thing I'm going to do is a review of Twin Peaks: The Return, which is season 3, with the aforementioned Christopher Sandbach and The Prudentialist. So we're looking forward to that. I unfortunately it was delayed because Christopher Sandbach rolled his car, and things happened there, and I'm also sort of waiting till I've got a new computer and a microphone and all this coming to make it sound a bit better. So anyway, look to that, and again, thank you, Mr. Burden, for having me on your lovely show.
Oh, of course. As far as my stuff, The Jay Burden Show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want the episodes early and ad-free, you're going to have to throw me a few bucks. You can do so on Substack, Gumroad, Patreon, or Subscribestar. Again, D, this was a ton of fun. And to everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.